So great to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about how to tackle redesigns with shared humanity. Before we talk about redesigns, I figured I'd talk to you about how I've been redesigning my career continuously. I like to employ a stochastic outlook when it comes to the future. How many of you could predict exactly where you would be 5 years ago? Raise of hands. No one. Me neither. I didn't know I would be here 5 years ago. I didn't know that I would become a product manager. I didn't know that I would be on sabbatical right now in Birmingham. So let me tell you kind of how the comet's journey, as one of my mentors called me, arrived. And comets are people who have their own convictions and trajectory, and they travel at a certain velocity. They enter the orbital force of large planets when there is a values alignment, but quickly after their job is done, they leave and move on to the next planet. So how did I begin my comet's journey? Well, I thought I wanted to go to law school. I actually applied to law school. I took the LSATs, I got into law school, wanted to make my immigrant parents happy, decided to defer law school, and instead I joined a solar startup called Sunrun when they were still under 100 people, Series A. I was the founding member of the customer service team. Never thought I would be answering customer phone calls for 8 hours a day. And at Sunrun, I kind of realized, hey, there's this area called product management. Kind of cool. It's cross-functional. I get to work with designers, engineers. I get to dabble in many different problems. And it really energized me. And I didn't know that product existed in undergrad because I came from a liberal arts background. I actually studied neuroeconomics and behavioral science. So I decided I'm going to shoot for my North Star. I'm going to become a PM, but how? So I taught myself how to become more technical. I took coding classes. I ended up interviewing at different solar SaaS companies as well as more software-related companies. And I moved over to working with utilities instead of against them at OPower as a TPM, where I built up a lot of my technical acumen, launching the OPower platform, which was a behavioral science-driven software to help utility consumers lower their net consumption. And then from there, I was like, I still want to be a PM. So how do I make this happen? And serendipitously, I got recruited to join SigFig, which is in fintech. And I joined as my first PM role. I was like, yes, finally made it, take that. You don't need a CS degree or an MBA to become a product manager. And I built out their new portfolio manager tool, as well as launched partnerships with AOL Finance and Yahoo Finance. But at SigFig, you know, I had to be honest with myself. I can speak finance. You know, I'm kind of a financial geek myself. I love managing all my portfolios and all that. But it's not something I'm emotionally connected to nor passionate about. So I decided, why not get into consumer tech, leverage my behavioral science background, and join Facebook to work as a product manager. So I was part of the Facebook rotational product management program, which allowed me to work on 3 different teams, exposed me to a breadth of different product areas. I worked under Newsfeed, built out Android deep linking, connecting 250 million users into the app. I worked on Instagram monetization tools, where we unlocked $2.5 million to protect minors against alcohol ads. And then finally, my last team, where I kind of found my own calling in media and content creation tool, was launching and building Notes, which I'm going to be talking about. And then Tumblr came calling, and I was like, hey, I've always wanted to live in New York once in my life. So I joined Tumblr to work very closely with David Karp to redesign our mobile expressions toolkit, which is known as new post forms on mobile, making it more modernized and relevant. After, the plot hasn't finished yet. After we got acquired by Verizon, I was like, you know what? I think it's time for me to try something new. And I've always been very much passionate about diversity and inclusion. I've done a lot of writing and speaking around that space. And I also love advising startups and have been angel investing for the past couple of years in Silicon Valley. So I'm exploring my next thing, which is investing in venture, writing a lot about behavioral science, and the intersection of tech and humanity, and also traveling. So I'm heading up to Amsterdam, Oslo, and Lillehammer randomly after this. If you have any recommendations, please tweet me. Cool, so got that background out of the way. Early days of Sunrun. How does a solar panel, utility bill, and Bo Derek connect to me? Well, I had the 3 most common questions working as a customer service rep, answering phone calls for 8 hours a day, which was 1, why am I not saving money? We were selling a 20-year solar lease to our customers, so they had a liability on their roof. They didn't own the panels, but they were guaranteed to lock in their solar rate and essentially displace part of their utility bill. So it was saving projections over 20 years. Second question is, hey, is Bo short for anything? And even better, all the 6-year-old creeper white dudes be like, you sound more like a Bo Derek. I'm like, no, that is not okay. And lastly, it was, when are you gonna rip this shit off my roof? I kid you not. This was the 3rd most common question. So early on, I was like, gee, like, we're a Series A company. We want to get funding for Series B. Maybe we should be fixing our customer pain points. And that was when I realized how important it is to extract customer pain points from customer complaints. And I developed this acumen for pulling signal from the noise and honing in on human problems that are foundational to product changes. Because let's be real, we change products to solve human problems, not the other way around. So when should you consider a redesign? Redesigns are really scary. They're a huge commitment, they're a monolithic effort, they require you to really corral an entire organization, cross-functional team. Pulling the trigger for redesign is incredibly painful. So I'm gonna go over some reasons. One is technical constraint. And this is very common. These are redesigns driven mostly through engineering efforts. Your previous product may have been written in HTML. You may have developed your app on Ruby and realized it is no longer extensible and can support the new features or pivot into another direction. A lot of gaming startups actually have this problem where, their current Pocket Gem game was on one gaming engine, and if they want to add new features, small visual changes like grass blade moving, they can't with the old gaming engine, so they have to rewrite a new engine. Another example, which is becoming more and more common as user interfaces start to accelerate and design trends are constantly moving because designers are now starting to create new languages and visual styles, is keeping up with the visual changes in UX and UI. And a big example of this would be iOS going from a skeuomorphic icons over to a flat design to make sure that Apple's still fresh and relevant. And this is super key to making sure that you can keep up with your competitors on even kind of a visual, psychological level. And the other reason, which I saw at SigFig, is the business has evolved. So we eventually started out as a portfolio tracker. You sync your brokerage account and we'll let you know, hey, how are your portfolios doing up and down? And then we decided to pivot into a portfolio manager, an investment manager. So SigFig evolved from being a simple piggy bank to now, we are competing with the TD Ameritrades, the wealth fronts, the future advisor of the world. So clearly the old designs no longer translate into the future direction. And along that similar vein is you got to keep up with your competitors. Instagram, one could argue that adding stories is also a big redesign. There was a new space that was created within the app to keep up with Snapchat. And Instagram, did make it better, but they duplicated it better. And that has migrated a lot of Snapchat users over to Instagram. And last but not least is the evolution of a brand. When I first joined Sunrun, we got all this fancy swag with a house on it, and I was like, awesome, I'm gonna keep this. This is gonna be worth something. I can sell it on eBay one day. Well, guess what? A better brand came out, which moved us from being a single home solar system over to let's take on the grid. Let's compete with the utility company. Let's take on Sun Edison, PG&E, and one day you can be completely independent from the grid. That was a bold and ambitious pivot from being singular solar system to platformizing solar and extending it to an entire city. So the brand evolved as well. Which, by the way, my old Sunrun swag is still good if you guys want some. You know, it might be worth something. And last, sorry, I think I'm out of sync right here. Okay, cool. So there are so many different ways of approaching redesigns. One is the more safe approach, with a lot of product managers at big tech companies love. The more measured and data-driven approach is going to be iterative redesigns. So what that means is you're making data-driven decisions, and you're also A/B testing throughout the entire process. So you have a sense of direction in terms of, are you going down the right path? Is this the North Star you're moving towards? And a lot of PMs and big tech companies advocate for this, because you're not going to have a big grand unveil and realize, shoot, our metrics tanked. The trade-off here is sometimes you really science the shit out of the product. You know, this is kind of the Google example where Marissa Mayer is like, let's test 20 different colors of blue and see which is like gets the most click, right? And that becomes a very myopic direction. So this approach works, but it's not perfect. And the other approach, with a lot of my design friends love to say, is a grand overhaul. This is kind of what I call rip the Band-Aid off approach. And designers often recommend this because it offers a more holistic change and kind of philosophical thinking to the new product. And it really avoids this weird Frankenstein product where you're kind of in like the twilight zones, like in between like the old product and the new product, and becomes really jarring and incongruous to the user. So Pinterest tried this with their homepage redesign. The designers basically were like, we will eat any metric tanks that happen, and then we'll just, you know, PMs like just try to work your way up from there. And Medium also tried this too. So the risk with a grand overhaul is you don't really know causality. You don't know what caused, you know, one metric to drop. You don't know how did time spent end up, you know, dropping as a result of your redesign. So there's also risk to it. So I guess the question now is, like, I've kind of delineated these two schools of thought. You know, one, PMs and big tech company tend to advocate, and then one, designers tend to advocate. So which is the best approach? Well, I am sorry to say, but it really depends. And this is the most lawyerly answer I will ever give to you, having not gone to law school. And that's because, you know, you have to look at redesigns and products case by case. You would think that out of Facebook, you'd always be approaching redesigns from an iterative process based off of its scale and its size. But there are cases when it actually makes sense for you to rip the Band-Aid off. And the same goes for smaller startups too, where a more iterative and measured approach could really help you get on the path to a product market fit. So how do you figure out what goes into a redesign? Having been a liberal arts major, I don't think in terms of ones and zeros. I tend to see things on a gradient and see that there's a spectrum in life. The spectrum I call how to follow your heart versus the data. And here is, on one end, is pure intuition. This is where you follow your gut, you really lean on your product sense. You still look at data, but these data are proxies into the future where you want to go, because no one's done what you've done before. And that is usually applies for a C to a Series A company. So these are companies I've advised where they don't really know if their MVP is going to work, but they have a sense based off of, you know, ethnography studies, qualitative studies, based off of, you know, market analysis, that maybe we should go in this direction. And then as you move across the spectrum, where the horizontal axis shows the growth and the scale of the company, you know, a Series B plus, like beyond that, is going to require more data. This is where your, you know, user personas of Joan, Tad, and Margaret are no longer enough because you have a lot more user base. And as a founder and as a product manager, you're really not able to capture exactly what a representative study of your users. And then for large tech companies, this is the data end of the spectrum. You know, at a Facebook scale, 2 billion people, there is no way you can have your intuition for what a 13-year-old in India who shares his low-end Android with 5 other relatives and family is going to be, you know, wanting. So at that point, you really have to be pulling as much data as possible and forming clear hypotheses and even different subsets of the product for your international user base. So for the case of Notes at Facebook, which was my last team on Facebook and the truest calling for me, actually, we actually fell on this end of the spectrum, which is very much on the intuition side. And that may be contrary to what you think is possible at a big tech company. So I'm going to explain why. So for the Notes redesign, we had very low usage. And this was an engineering-driven effort where I worked alongside 2 other engineers. We were actually moonlighting in addition to our full-time job. And we realized, you know, no one's really using old Notes. Like, Notes had a big I would say a big potential to take on Blogger, to take on Tumblr, to take on, you know, Medium in the past, but people just stopped writing long form. And partly that's because Facebook has moved away from text-based posts over to more photos and videos, and it, you know, makes sense with the kind of mobile affordances in place. But as a writer, I always believed in the power of text, and I advocated that text is not dead. So I wanted to bring back Notes so that people could have deeper, more expressive ways of sharing their stories on Facebook besides a simple check-in or, you know, a minutia, which is how we call, like, how you're feeling. So we looked at old Notes, realized low usage. We also had a technical constraint, which was old Notes is written in HTML with minor hacking around to support photos. We also saw that you know, old Notes required us to be migrating, you know, notes that you've written from 5 to 10 years ago over to new Notes. So we had to really think about the migration plan. And I'm really proud that we were able to rewrite the web editor in React, and it's now open source. And a lot of tech startups who are writing on composition, you know, type of products are using this open source framework. So definitely check it out. I worked alongside Isaac and Alex, and these are 2 phenomenal engineers I would ride or die for. The other steps we had to look through is re-architecting Notes and making sure that it was going to be extensible. So we were able to build the foundation for instant articles. They actually use the same backend. We also wanted to make sure that Notes was going to be consistent with instant articles because the media strategy I pitched was Notes is instant articles to the people. You know, you no longer have to be a publisher to be writing long form. You can gain traction by virtue of the quality of your content and be known for something. So we partnered up with the Instant Articles team. I worked with Mike Mattis to make sure that the front-end design and the web consumption was going to be consistent with Instant Articles. And we had to also build mobile consumption. So prior to the redesign of Notes, you could only create and view on the web. You know, this was kind of the rip the Band-Aid off moment afterwards. We realized, well, with low usage, we could really just deprecate the old overnight. There was no need for us to kind of do an iterative process, which in retrospect I realize is a huge luxury working on a product that still touches, you know, a couple billion people. So we lastly started a migration plan where we didn't want people to be in this halfway house between old Notes and new Notes, so every time you would edit your old note, it would convert into a new note. And this was really a 0 to 1 effort, you know, and as a PM, as a product person, I get most excited about those nebulous problems where you have to go from 0 to 1 instead of iterate from 1 to 1.1. And I really enjoyed working on this type of kind of amorphous problem here. So here is an example of what old notes looks like. This is a note I wrote from college. I was really pissed that Obama also named his dog Bo. And as you can tell, it's kind of janky. It's just like text, no editing, and a photo. So new notes, we want to make sure that it was going to be more immersive and extensible, and you could add a cover photo, you could format your content, you could move around, you know, the photos. And we had this one New Zealand photographer who ended up creating these beautiful visual stories out of notes. We also had a professor, you know, in Princeton who wrote a poem every single day on notes. And I loved how Neil deGrasse Tyson decided to publish a note as well when he got rejected from the New York Times, because the New York Times specifically asked him to be a columnist as a black scientist. That was part of the reason. It's like, what is your view as a black scientist? And he was like, well, here's my view, criticizing why you are asking me for my opinion as a black scientist. So notes became an alternative outlet to, you know, the New York Times, to the other kind of blogging platforms. And we saw a natural organic growth in people writing on notes around political issues, social issues, and sharing really intimate life moments that they couldn't through a short Facebook text post. So let's go back to this spectrum and take a look and see, you know, how does Tumblr kind of fall relative to notes in this spectrum? So Tumblr actually fell on the other end of the spectrum, which is leaning more on data and an iterative approach. And part of that is because, you know, we had a core product that our users so deeply loved, and Tumblr users are very human people. You know, it's a place where you can share your most intimate details and your authentic self instead of the public-facing person that you have to be on, you know, Facebook and Instagram, where you're sharing your highlight reel. So it was very important that we got a redesign right, and we also, you know, made sure that this was the kind of psychological service we needed to offer to our users, instead of just, hey, here's something fancy and snazzy, we think you should have it. So how do you know you really need a redesign? So the big questions I tend to ask myself is what, how, and why. You know, what are you trying to solve in terms of the human problems? You know, why do you have to redesign, and why are you trying to solve these issues? And how are you going to do it? So on Tumblr, it was very clear that we were beholden to old architecture, also HTML, which really, really sucked. When you edit a text post on your mobile app, it shows all the HTML gibberish, which was a huge pain, and people just ended up not writing a lot as a result. We also wanted a newer composer that wasn't going to be so archaic and felt like the web editor, which we had. And for a lot of Tumblr users, you know, early days of Tumblr, just a little context, it started out as a Tumblr log. So that meant you could post just about anything on the web on Tumblr. You could post audio, you could post photos, you could post text. And, you know, David Karp's vision is we don't want people to feel like they have to be these, like, you know, like bona fide, like, bloggers and have these, like, huge internet presence. Like, anyone can share themselves on Tumblr. It was a place of freedom of expression. So we wanted to take elements of that original mission that's so near and dear to our original power users and bring it to mobile. So we redid the composition to be more simple, cleaned it up. We also made sure that tagging was featured foremost, since tagging is super key to the Tumblr social explore and just kind of the entire ecosystem. So we made tagging more relevant. So when you tag here, you can get a sheet that comes up, and tags are actually, for the first time, like you can tap and you can move them around. Like we noticed Twitter and Instagram hasn't really done anything with tags, and like tags could really be the gateway to finding more relevant content and getting new users their first like. We also redid the text format so that you could be able to kind of modify and rich edit your text. You could bold, you could italic. We added like a curvy, fun, fancy font for you to be using as like a header. We added bullets and numbered lists because listicles are really big, like top 10 things in the fandom community is really big. We also added insert a photo to the Reblog. So Reblog is fundamental to Tumblr. Reblog is kind of like the comparative advantage that Tumblr has over a lot of other internet communities, and the retweet was actually based off the Reblog. So a lot of people participate in these long Reblog chains, and for years they've been asking, how can we insert photos into Reblogs? Just something very simple. And before we even arrived at, hey, let's just give them the simple thing first, we actually did a lot of complex explorations into having a fancy schnazzy Reblog editor. We thought people wanted way more than inserting photos. And we realized actually that's not the case. They just wanted something really simple. So I'm going to go through some explorations that didn't pan out, but I think it's important that we learn from our mistakes. So this is a mock that we had, which had a two-step posting. So we thought that because tags are good for the community, because tags could help our first-time users be able to get their first like and find other blogs, that we should really bring tags to the forefront. So here we have you, as the first screen, you can compose. You can move on to the second screen where you have to tag. And then you would post. We also obliterated this cog, which had a lot of the posting options, and moved it to the second step. So our hypothesis here is people won't mind a two-step process if the tagging is going to be more fun and visual, and you can like have auto generated tags as well as autocomplete, and we could do a lot of tag search history showing you recommendations for tags. But that really proved to be wrong. So in our tests we found out that people were posting about the same. They were tagging more, which was good, but reblogs went down. And reblogs are super key to facilitating conversations on Tumblr. So as a result, we aim to mitigate that reblog drop through making a fast reblog change where there's two types of reblogs. There's kind of rich reblog with comment, and then there's a fast reblog where you can hold down and just reblog directly to one of your blogs. And we created this new complicated fast reblog where you could fast reblog and then add a comment and skip the tagging completely. And later on, we realized this is really just a Band-Aid solution. Like, people just don't want a two-step tagging process. We provided this to really boost tagging, but that was actually pretty short-sighted because people just want to be able to post more easily, and tagging should be part of their post composition experience. So what are some takeaways from both Facebook and Tumblr? Well, I think that as technologists, it's important for us to have an ethical duty to think about doing the human thing first. Don't see people as numbers, and I actually had certain kind of conundrums working at a large tech company like Facebook where I felt like we were sciencing the shit out of things. We were A/B testing every single thing. Everything was numbers driven, and sometimes you have to look at the numbers, but then see how it ties back to the human problems. And I think this is super fundamental to design thinking, but I also think it's just fundamental to being a good person. And I think having a liberal arts education and being able to read and write and philosophize and realize that there's no clear right or wrong answer is super key to making innovative product changes that humanize technology instead of just build and bring us into a dystopian world. And the other takeaway, I think, is constantly be testing your assumptions through user testing. I think this is something that a lot of people underestimate, and user testing doesn't have to be super fancy. You know, you don't have to be sitting behind a glass door and observing, you know, how someone's reacting and interacting with an InVision app. By the way, InVision is great. Someone else is going to be talking about that later. But we did something as simple as storyboards. You know, we would ask teens to come in and look at different storyboards, 2D storyboards that like designers and PMs paired together created, and asked them to look at something so low fidelity with no color and be like, what are your reactions to these concepts? So in a way, by making it a low fidelity based user testing, you know, we were able to extract and glean people's raw reactions to an idea or a feature or a big kind of redesign, instead of, you know, fixating on something pretty small. And lastly, I think that it's important for you to consider gradual rollout, holdouts, and migration plans. One thing I learned from Facebook is constantly be measuring every single thing. And we had really good practices for gradual rollouts, because you can't just overnight flip a switch on and 2 billion people just have it, right? You do incremental testing, 1% testing, 5% testing, 10%, 20%. And the beauty of that is if something is not working, or if you do a country test like in New Zealand, you can always roll it back, which is great. And also having holdouts is super key to see what are the long-term implications to a new product that you may not have foreseen. So I highly recommend having gradual testing. So for the Tumblr redesign, I took something from Facebook over, and I made sure that when we did limited testing with a 10% user base, that at the end of their first composition behavior, they would get a tooltip, which is, you know, how did you think about this experience? And they'd go through a survey and give us feedback. So that way we could gauge if we were going in the right direction. And that was super instrumental in us figuring out this two-step process just isn't working for us. So thank you, and come again.
Thank you. Just quickly, I wanted to ask about the issue of diversity.
Sure.
I mean, tech, right, it's got a massive sexism problem, massive diversity problem.
Yes.
Not just in Silicon Valley, by the way, in this country too.
Yeah.
You've been a really outspoken advocate on, about this.
Yeah.
How do you kind of try and draw some signal from that noise of people feeling really hurt and angry about what's going on?
Are you talking about in general, or more targeted towards founders?
Either way, I guess I'm sort of looking for some kind of solution, because I know you've written about how tech can improve this and do better.
Totally. So I actually wrote something called about how diversity is a failed product, and we should be able to fix it and approach it from more of a product standpoint. Like if you invested in all these recruiting initiatives and poured millions of dollars in and none of the numbers change, like we can't be complacent. Like that is a failed product. So I think it's super important for us to look at diversity not just from, you know, this is a social mission, but to also really be able to quantify and follow the numbers, you know. And I'm, you know, as I'm starting to talk to venture firms, I'm realizing that being agnostic to the numbers, to social issue, and just looking at the numbers is also a problem, and it's important for us to see that these two things aren't mutually exclusive. You know, hiring women founders and underrepresented minorities isn't lowering the bar. You know, it's more about mapping the social issues to the economic returns, and I really hope that we're going to be able to create a new economic model together with new investors who are going to be as representative and diverse as the founders they invest in, and have the numbers and to prove that actually investing in more diverse, you know, founders and teams, and not hiring people based off of your network, but also thinking about outreach, thinking about cognitive diversity, lifestyle diversity, is going to build stronger businesses in the end.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bo, and I'm a product manager, advisor, and investor. I previously have worked for Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, and I've also worked at solar renewable energy startups called Sunrun, O-Power, and a fintech company called SigFig. The way a product team is structured at Facebook versus Tumblr is very much a function of the company's life stage and the maturity of the product. So at Facebook, with hundreds of PMs, we were more organized on a vertical level in pillars, and each PM was responsible for a specific set of metrics and a smaller, piece of a feature. So how I would describe that would be you have a smaller slice of a pie, but a deeper slice. Whereas at Tumblr, given that we only had 5 product managers, we were more organized horizontally and had a lot more overlap in responsibilities. We also were more responsible for product spaces and going from 0 to 1 on new initiatives. In terms of thinking about how to create a great posting experience as like a new onboarded user, I think it's super important to be addressing challenges in the behavioral science and just the psychology of the user, because you are creating something that is going to elicit someone else to express and share their own thoughts and ideas, and that is an inherently very vulnerable thing to do. So the first challenge to overcome is understanding the human problems. Like, why aren't you sharing? Is it because you are afraid of having everyone, on Facebook know how you're doing? Your mom is going to read it, your manager is going to read it. Is it more about, not having the right tool to elicit that expression and that idea? So I think those are some challenges to address. And another way of breaking it down is to look at the intent of the users. Is this a high intent user or a low intent user? High intent users tend to know exactly what they're going to be sharing. So they're going into the app, they're choosing that specific post form they need and sharing it. Super easy. But the low intent users are going to be the ones with a little bit more reservation. They're not quite sure what they want to share, and you need to have a more open post form that's going to be inviting for them to try and explore different things. So considerations to take in designing for a global audience is super key to consider your app performance, how someone in a low connectivity area could interact with that. So one thing that at Facebook we had was low end Android Tuesdays, where you had, they were actually called 2G Tuesdays, where you could opt in on Tuesday to experience a 2G connection on your Android phone and really feel the pain of someone who is living in a low connectivity area. And I think so much of that is fundamental to cultivating a sense of empathy and not designing and building products in a bubble where, where we live in North America, it's very affluent, it's privileged, and it's important for you to think about outside of that bubble how other people are using their phone. They may be sharing that phone with other members. So thinking in terms of app performance is super key. That's why, Facebook has Facebook Lite. Another key factor is to think about localization and acculturation. So what are other values at stake internationally that you as a product manager or designer or engineer don't struggle with? So one example I give are women in India felt unsafe on Facebook and oftentimes deactivated their accounts because there was a big rise in impersonation. So we had to address that and realize what was at the center for their issue. What they valued the most was safety, and we created a whole new campaign around security, around protecting your images, around verifying accounts. So I think it's important to really gauge what the user needs, as well as take into consideration different cultures and social issues at play in. So product manager is a Jill of all trades. You have to be many different things. A couple qualities that come to mind, which I don't think are emphasized enough on the CV, is empathy, having shared sense of humanity. And I think that comes from having really deep experiences and struggles, also being very worldly, having traveled, having just lived life and read a lot. That gives you an ability to relate to other people, not on just the user level, but also on an interpersonal level with the engineers and designers you work with. Another key trait is going to be adaptability. I think that the PM role is one of the most ambiguous roles, and what you set on to do today is not going to be the same in 2 months from now and 6 months from now. So it's incredibly important for you to fail fast and celebrate it and have that sense of resilience of like, I got knocked down, but I'm going to get back up again and pivot and course correct and kind of iterate through time. And you just kind of see yourself as this like MVP product, like you as a PM are the product, and you're going to be adapting to whatever challenges your team needs. You can even be an armchair psychologist if you have to, or be like a janitor and schlep. And I think the third most important characteristic is the ability to zoom in and out. I think a lot of product managers tend to go too deep on the executional level and be super tactical and only think about what do we need as a company, instead of looking out at the larger competitive landscape and seeing trends that are emerging and making their product changes based off of the larger landscape. So the biggest product lesson I learned at Tumblr is how to work harmoniously with designers. I think that I've always had a deep respect for design, but going into a company where design was so crucial and at the DNA of the company really made me realize that design can expand into every aspect of the product and really develop, I think, a deeper visual cue and connection to not just, UX, UI, but also aesthetics, right? The brand and the voice of Tumblr is so much around the feel, the color, and the visual design. And that was something I think living in Silicon Valley I wasn't as exposed to, and then moving to New York and kind of seeing this diversity of industries from media to fashion to tech has helped me realize that like the design is everywhere, and you and your designer at the end of the day really are best friends. You guys have to work harmoniously together, and it's a marriage, because when that marriage happens, then the best products happen. I've always wanted to come to the UK for a conference. I've also seen speakers in the past. I saw that Mercy spoke here, and Christoph, one of the designers I worked with at Facebook, spoke here. And I just love the organization level, as well as like the way you guys deliver Canvas as an experience for both the presenters as well as the attendees. It's just got such a human touch. And I, for the past 2 years, have been talking with Kath and really wanted to be a part of it, and so glad to be here now. Yeah, my favorite talk so far was Hyen's talk around Microsoft's research for the disabled people. I think that her projects are so complex beyond just a software level. Like, she's able to integrate human problems with hardware solutions, as well as understanding the cross-functional challenges of a hospital, of a government. And I think that degree of product design thinking is really what we all need tech to move towards, because coming from Silicon Valley, I realized that people can science the shit out of technology and base entire startups on their own assumptions. And seeing Hyen's talk made me realize that it's so important to be a world citizen first and talk to different contingencies before coming up with a solution, instead of just starting with a solution and finding a user for that solution.